All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a seriously fascinating thesis from a guy who literally helped build the modern tech world, legendary venture capitalist John Doerr. If you follow the tech space at all, you definitely know Doerr's name. He's the visionary who famously backed both Google and Amazon in their infancy. But today, we're not just looking back at his greatest hits. We are looking forward. We're exploring exactly why Doerr firmly believes that generative artificial intelligence is the single greatest wave of innovation in human history, and how he uses his decades of experience to navigate it.
Here's the game plan for today. First, we'll look at tech's 13-year tsunamis, then dive into why AI is the biggest wave. After that, we'll cover the traits of great founders, review some of Doerr's iconic Google and Amazon bets, and wrap up with the power of human capital.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, tech's 13-year tsunamis.
To really grasp the sheer magnitude of what's happening with AI right now, we have to understand how John Doerr views the historical rhythm of Silicon Valley. He doesn't just see random bursts of innovation, right? He sees a distinct pattern. Think about it. He started at Kleiner Perkins back in 1980, exactly when the personal computer and microchip revolution was exploding. Fast forward roughly 13 years to 1993, boom, the browser emerges, kicking off the consumer internet. Add another 13 years, we hit 2006, the era of the iPhone and massive cloud computing. The math is kind of wild. It's this precise 13-year rhythm of pure disruption, and it leads us directly to the present moment, generative AI.
Which brings us to Section 2, AI, the biggest wave. And let me tell you, Doerr believes this current tsunami completely dwarfs every single cycle that came before it. His conviction on this is absolute. He calls it the biggest thing ever, since everything. I mean, coming from a guy who bankrolled the internet and mobile revolutions, that really says something. He actually thinks AI is totally underhyped right now. Sure, we don't fully know how it's going to reshape education, employment, or healthcare just yet, but he points to one incredibly tangible metric. AI has an absolute insatiable hunger for electrons. The energy demands alone signal that this is an infrastructure build-out unlike anything humanity has ever seen. Just to put the unprecedented speed of this wave into perspective, think about this. Just 3 years after ChatGPT launched, 50% of all Americans are already using generative AI. Half the country. Think about how long it took for half the population to get a PC in their home, or, to carry a smartphone. The adoption curve we're seeing here is basically a vertical line. The value creation, as Doerr puts it, is just off the charts.
So you might be wondering, where is the smart money actually going? Well, at 74 years old, Doerr isn't just sitting on the sidelines watching this wave crash. Through his family office, he is actively hunting for founders wielding AI. And he's not looking for cute software tricks either. He wants founders using this massive new superpower to tackle our most brutal existential challenges, specifically the climate transition and healthcare. He wants to find, fund, and accelerate the entrepreneurs who are solving massive human problems head-on.
Let's pivot a bit to Section 3, traits of great founders. Because spotting a tech tsunami, that's really only half the battle. How do you spot the humans actually capable of riding it? Well, Doerr relies on a very specific 4-step framework, and it starts with a surprisingly blunt question. Would I mind getting into trouble with them? He's super honest about this. No matter how glossy a startup looks on the outside, the inside is always a messy can of worms. Building a company is a brutal struggle. So first things first, he needs to know, can I handle being in the trenches with you? Second, he looks for people who genuinely see the world differently and who use technology to literally bend reality to that vision. Third, they absolutely must be elite recruiters because nobody builds an empire alone. And finally, number 4, they've got to be incredible salespeople, constantly selling that big vision to investors, teammates, and customers. All right, let's look at some real-world examples. In Section 4, Google and Amazon bets.
Let's ground this whole theory in reality with a scrappy 1996 meeting featuring none other than Jeff Bezos. This is basically the prime example of Doerr's founder framework in action. He walked into Amazon's early makeshift offices and found a founder who was incredibly frugal, wildly ambitious, and just completely obsessed with the customer. Bezos famously asked his board to help him fight the institutional no. That status quo telling everyone e-commerce simply couldn't work at scale. Doerr dove right in because Bezos perfectly embodied that disruptive, reality-bending founder archetype we just talked about. Then, 3 years later, in 1999, Doerr meets Larry Page and Sergey Brin in a Menlo Park garage. The financial contrast here is just staggering. Doerr wrote a $12 million check for a 12% stake in Google. At the time, that valued the tiny startup at $100 million, and people in the industry honestly thought Doerr was paying a crazy high price. It was literally the largest check Kleiner Perkins had ever written. And today, that company is hovering around a $3.89 trillion market cap. Crazy, right? But what sold Doerr wasn't just the underlying tech. It was that Larry and Sergey dreamed bigger about the potential of search than anyone else on the planet. They saw a future nobody else had caught on to yet. Of course, venture capital isn't just about hitting home runs. You're going to take some hits too. Doerr playfully contrasts his mega wins with a piece of advice his partners gave him early on. Never invest in anything with wheels. Well, he ignored it. He backed the Segway, which, as we know, famously flopped. He backed Fisker, a car company that really struggled, all while completely missing out on Tesla. But he uses this to highlight a fundamental truth of the innovation game. You can only lose your money once, but you can make it many, many times over if you get it right. It's a pure game of asymmetric returns. Now, let's pull back for our final segment, Section 5, the power of human capital. Let's look at the big picture and the overarching societal impact of this whole venture-backed ecosystem. Doerr is adamant that despite our obsession with code, microchips, and algorithms, venture capital is fundamentally a human capital business. It all depends on empowering people to drive innovation and develop markets. Without human drive, vision, and resilience, the technology just sits there. The capital, that's just fuel. The humans are the engine. Actually, this reliance on human ingenuity is the exact reason he decided to sit out the entire cryptocurrency wave. While everybody else was pouring billions into crypto, Doerr looked at it and simply didn't see human capital playing a powerful role in its development. Now, he admits he might eventually be proven wrong on that one, but his thesis held firm. If a technology doesn't heavily rely on deeply empowering human capital to solve real-world problems, it just doesn't fit his model, period. And the macro data vividly backs up his belief in this human-centric ecosystem. Get a lot of this. Over the last half-century, an astounding 81% of all patents issued to U.S. public companies originated from VC-backed firms. 81%. That means the vast majority of American corporate innovation over the last 50 years isn't coming from safe legacy R&D labs. It's coming from startups backed by risk capital, driven by founders fighting that institutional no. It's a structural phenomenon that literally drives the modern economy. But perhaps even more important to Doerr than patents or trillion-dollar valuations is this one specific number, 5.3 million. The transition of venture capital from this tiny little cottage industry having breakfast meetings on Sand Hill Road to a massive global movement, it directly powered 5.3 million jobs in the year 2022 alone. This ecosystem isn't just about making founders rich, it's an absolute engine for the modern workforce. Which leaves us with a massive, provocative question to wrap up this explainer. Generative AI is the biggest wave since the beginning of everything, but tech is fundamentally a human business. So as AI automates our tasks over this next 13-year cycle, where exactly does human ingenuity fit in? How will tomorrow's founders adapt their human capital to not just survive this tsunami, but actually ride it to the very top?